Ann Strieber, and I'm here on Dreamland interviewing Mark Waldman, the author of How God Changes Your Brain. Now, this is a very interesting topic for me because I would say that God changed my brain, or maybe my brain changed my attitude towards God, because after my aneurysm burst 5 years ago, I became a much more spiritual person. And so this book really interested me. And Mark, I've been reading a book recently. It's a hard book to read. A very technical book, but it says how the brain changes itself. And it talks about periods of what the author calls plasticity, when hormones, age, perhaps other things, combine to form a period in which the brain is very receptive to change. And surprisingly, I was delighted to find that one of these is older age, which turns out to be an excellent time to learn a foreign language, unlike conventional wisdom always tells us. And I have also learned that evolution is completed by your fellow human beings. When we're born, our brains are not in the final stage they will be in later. We have to complete each other's brains by teaching mainly speech to our children, but also the brains of people who know how to read are different from those who do not. And this has been discovered with the studying a few of the wild children who have been found. One I think it was about 20 years ago, actually, in a suburb of California. She had never been spoken to, didn't know how to read, and her brain was profoundly different, and it never did fully mature. So,
that is correct.
Yeah, so I'm sure you know about this story. And so this interests me very much. Now, it seems to me that while religion changes the brain, which is your thesis, it doesn't always change the brain for the better. I mean, look at this horrible dogma that's going around, people blowing each other up with jihadi attacks and things. I mean, it's not always a positive change, or is it? What do you think?
Well, let me first make it clear to the audience what neuroplasticity actually is.
Oh, I'd love to know.
And the model I would like to use, most of us, when we think about the brain, we think about the brain like an organ, like a muscle, like a piece of meat. And it really isn't. So the image I like to use is, imagine that you're in a room that's maybe about, 100 feet by 100 feet by 100 feet. And I want you to fill that room, and you can use your imagination with this, with 100 billion worms.
Uh-huh.
And that each of those worms have as many as 10,000 little wiggling feet. The worms, the 100 billion worms, are the neurons of the brain, and those 10,000 wiggling feet on each neuron are the dendrites. They bring in information from other neurons, and then they send them out through the axons. So if you can imagine this giant room filled with these wiggling worms that are growing all the time, and sometimes their little legs are disappearing, and sometimes they're growing extra ones. This is the actual state of the human brain from the moment that we're born. It's
always
constantly changing.
Uh-huh.
It's never making the same connection twice.
Oh, really?
No, correct. The fact that we even think that we are remembering the same memory from our childhood turns out to be false. Matter of fact, autobiographical memories have been proven to be the most inaccurate, and it's very easy to plant false memories in the brain.
And with hypnosis, it often is too. And we warn people about this when they go to these. We have a lot of UFO contactee listeners, and we warn people when they go to these MUFON type hypnotists that they will plant ideas in their brains and actually destroy their real memories.
Well, it alters the real memory. Even each time we recall a memory ourselves, our brain, our frontal lobes go in and they tap different memories in different ways and take little bits and pieces. There's no way that the brain wants to remember everything it's learned, so it's very selective. Like when we look at a photograph, the brain actually maybe picks out 5 or 6 or 7 aspects of that photograph or that painting or that picture, and that's all it uses to remember it. It's very efficient in that way. It doesn't want to remember everything. And what's very unusual is that if you recall a traumatic memory when you're in a very relaxed state, you're really forming a new memory because you're recalling an event but in a state of relaxation, which you weren't when you were traumatized. So that's the neurological mechanism on how you undo historical traumas. You help to rebuild a memory with a more positive experience attached to it. So we're born with a brain that is overly plastic. It's overly connected. We actually have 200 billion neurons when we're born, and we have to throw away about 100 billion of them. If we don't, we may end up being autistic. So the first thing the brain has to do is to eliminate.
An overactive brain?
That's correct.
Oh, really?
Too many neurons, too many connections, too many sensations coming in. And so it's called pairing. And over the years, it's kind of like when you're in first grade. You can learn, you learn that the teacher says 1 + 1 is what? And one kid's going to say 3, and another kid is going to say 2, and somebody else is going to say it's lunchtime. And each of these forms a memory. And now we have to, through training, get rid of all of the false memories that we form so that we just basically recall that 1 + 1 = 2. So
maybe
it turns out...
Maybe autism, excuse me for jumping in, maybe autism is the lack of socialization because these people are throwing up barriers because their brain is so overactive and they have to cut something off. Do you think that's it?
Yes, when you ask an autistic child will sometimes bang their head against the wall, and if you ask them why they're doing it, they're telling you that there's too much noise. They're hearing too much. They're more sensitive than we are. They can't filter out the information. They can't become focused enough. And then what happens when we're with the older, the brain doesn't even fully come online until our mid to late 20s. And then it begins to deteriorate about the age of 30 and begins to break down slowly. We don't tend to notice it until we're about 50.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the same problem again with neuroplasticity. In other words, we tend to have too much of it. So there are neurons and neurochemicals in the brain that suppress this rapid growth and reconnecting of neurons. You don't want to have too many connections happening and too many changes happening all the time. You're going to feel very, very confused. So that's one of the things that we're learning about aging is that we end up having too much neuroplasticity. So the brain is always trying to balance itself with just the right amount. So yes, learning new information is always possible, always easy, making new connections. Certain areas will begin to deteriorate. I mean, it's harder to learn a new task, but it's easier to refine an old task that you were good at.
Well, I once saw a movie, The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which showed an image of someone's brain, and it was a room filled with overflowing bookshelves and filing cabinets, and and he was trying to remember something, and it seemed to be saying that we've got our filing cabinets get too full as we get older.
Well, actually, that's not the case. That's why this metaphor of a brain full of 100 billion worms that are just they're just growing and connecting. You can actually take a film of a single neuron with its dendrites and axons, and over a matter of days you can see that it makes new connections. It grows out new tentacles, tendrils, makes different types of connections, and then it retreats. If you don't use that particular circuit, it can fade away and sometimes even disappear.
Which is why so many of our childhood memories seem to be gone for so many people, I think.
And they keep changing all the time as well.
Well, they know.
So we're always building new memories.
Yeah. Lawyers know that that people have terrible memories when it comes to recalling, what the criminal looked like, and they learn not to trust them.
Nobody has ever figured out exactly how many memories we can hold in consciousness during a single minute. but I'm going to make a guess that we probably have like 1,000 memories per minute that we're recalling.
Ooh.
But as we get old, we begin to also notice that we may forget 5 or 6 or 7 things or 10 things during the day, and we get worried that we're having Alzheimer's or dementia or what have you, when in essence we've, less than 0.1% of our memory has been impaired. A neurologist basically asks you one question before he becomes concerned that you may actually have memory loss. Can you remember how to get home?
Oh,
if
really?
you get lost going home, then that's a key question. But if you walk down the stairs and you suddenly go, gee, I knew I was going downstairs to get something. Oh, no, I'm having memory impairment. No, instead of having 1,000 memories per minute, you're only having 980 memories per minute. No big deal. Nothing to worry about.
That's very interesting. Whitley and I, we take long walks every day, and I remember once in San Antonio, we found a woman walking down the street who didn't know how to get home, and we called the police. And it's just very interesting. That obviously was her problem. And she had wandered away from her minder. And she didn't know how to get home, but her home was just a few feet away. We're going to take a break now, and we'll come right back with Mark Waldman. This is fascinating discussion, Mark. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online with guest host Ann Strieber.
Hi, Mark. We're back, and we're talking about how God changes your brain. And we've been talking about memories mostly. And now I want to talk a little about God. Now, you're a minister of a very obscure church, which I had never heard of, and I've even heard of the Universalist Church, and I've even heard of the Wiccan churches. So, and the churches that psychic mediums belong to, the Spiritualist Church of America. I forget what the exact name is. I'm sure somebody will send it to me. But what is the name of the church you are an ordained minister of?
I went through a training that was like partly psychoanalytic training and partly inner spiritual development, and it was called the Society for Evolving the Self Matrix. And then I went into more formal psychoanalytic training with Bruno Bettelheim.
Oh, I used to read his books. They're wonderful. Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, when I teamed up with Andy Newberg, we began to combine the expertise that I had in the psychology and sociology of religious and spiritual experiences with his brain scan research in terms of what happens in your brain when you engage in different forms of prayer and meditation. And so if we were to carry the neuroplasticity framework one step forward, and we want to look at spiritual concepts such as God or peace or happiness or compassion, these words are so profoundly difficult to envision. Like, we all know what a chair is. We're going to bump into it. It hurts and everything else. But the moment you mention God, a child's brain cannot even conceive of an abstract noun.
And I think most people have a pretty childish image of God, but that's just my little prejudice there. Go on, yeah.
Well, actually, it turns out only if you choose to become an agnostic or an atheist do you maintain a childish image of God. There's a fascinating study that was done.
There's a challenge for you. Okay, go ahead.
In the 1990s, and they asked children from the ages of 7 to 16 in West Germany who were attending Lutheran churches to simply draw a picture of God.
Old man with the beard.
And well, I'll tell you in a moment.
Oh,
and then the other, and what they found is that when you are below the age of 9, you'll almost always draw a picture of a face with an eye and a mouth, maybe some arms and legs. But as those children got older, the drawings became more and more abstract. We begin to see spirals and circles, pictures of nature, suns, wavy lines. And by the time they reached 14 or 15, they had gone from drawing 80% pictures of anthropomorphic, in other words, pictures that look like a person, to 80% of them were abstract. But In the East German school, which was very anti-religious
Yeah.
at the particular time, there was no development. So by the time you're 15, 16, or 17, these individuals were still drawing a basic face. Now, young children cannot conceive of an abstract notion. They have to have they can only process concrete nouns.
Yeah.
So when you tell a child, God can hear your prayer, poof, an image of ears appear.
Yeah.
And if you tell the child that God can see you or sees everything, eyeballs appear. Because a child has to associate the word hearing or seeing with an object, like an ear or an eye. But the more you contemplate an abstract notion, something that you actually can't quite see or grasp. For example, there's no evidence that peace actually exists in the world, but I deeply believe that peacefulness is something that is obtainable. It's an abstract idea, and the brain looks for different types of concrete associations with it. But when we get old enough, maybe by the time we're 15, 16, or 17, we can begin to conceive of things that don't actually exist in ways that are very unique. So human beings are the only creatures that really think in abstract terms. So we're in the realm of imagination. We're in the realm of the frontal lobes. And this is where spiritual practices seem to help to organize the way in which we think. It calms down an overly active imagination. It helps us to become more focused, more relaxed, more open. And that's the neuroscience of spiritual experiences.
Well, you know, I really got to congratulate those Lutheran ministers of that West German group of kids, because they quickly moved into more abstract thinking and didn't stay with the face, and that shows they're not being fed too much of that awful negative dogma, which fundamentalism seems to always bring, no matter what type of fundamentalism it is.
Well, I would have to be careful about that too. I mean, my first experience with a fundamentalist minister was a very painful experience. He was pretty much yelling and screaming at me in my face.
He came to you?
It was very traumatic. What?
He came to you for counseling? Ooh.
Yeah, because we had to write an article in our book, which we actually called, anger and the fundamentalist in your brain, because we all have a little fundamentalist in our brain.
Yeah.
And I want to be very careful in the research. And so a lot of people have the notion that fundamentalists are mean, angry individuals, when if you actually go do the research, the people who are angry and hostile throughout the world, they're an extreme minority, less than 1%. But they make the most amount of noise. And our brains are designed to give attention to the single individual. There could be 1,000 people in the crowd, and the one person who yells out an obscenity, every brain is going to focus its attention on that person yelling out an obscenity. If somebody else is yelling out peace, happiness, the brain barely pays attention to that. It's not a threat to survival. So we're born with a brain that's designed to look for danger. And we have to train our brain to look for peacefulness and cooperation. And, just take a look at how people deal with driving on the freeway. We're amazingly cooperative. It's amazing that this monstrosity of a brain can actually work as well as it does. I mean, an ant only has 10,000 neurons, and it's far more cooperative. It has a much better social system. They can create air tunnels and ducts, air conditioning and heating systems. They know how to communicate with each other far more effectively than we do with our 100 billion neurons.
You know, what you just talked about with the fundamentalists reminds me of a quote from one of my heroes, who is Bishop John Shelby Spong, who once said,
yes,
"Religion is like a swimming pool. Most of the noise comes from the shallow end."
Yes.
And of course, he means the kids, the immature people.
Most of the noise also comes from the people who have been injured the most, people who have been hurt the most. And if you've been hurt over and over and over again, neurologically, your brain becomes a little on the fragile side. And that type of individual may actually find a highly structured church, which a fundamentalist church would be, helpful. It stops their mind from bouncing all over the place. It helps them to stay focused. This, and this, and this. It's very spelled out for you. So for some individuals, fundamentalism probably helps them to stay calm and serene and focused. Without that strict format, they'd be bouncing off the walls. They'd go out and kill themselves or somebody else.
No, I know someone whose father died very suddenly over Christmas a couple of years ago. And this person is a Catholic, but she has a degree in comparative religion and knows everything about religion. And so is a very open-minded person. But she said, maybe I just need to follow the rules. Go back to old-fashioned strict Catholicism. She was raised a Catholic. Maybe if I just follow the rules, everything will be all right. And that was so unlike her, but she was obviously retreating into that feeling of wanting a place to be safe.
It takes a lot of courage to explore the deeper issues of life. If you ask yourself the question, what is my purpose here? What will bring me happiness? What are my deepest values? These are profoundly difficult questions to contemplate. And in a certain sense, I would say that our brains are never very effective in identifying what is truly valuable and meaningful for you. So when you begin to ask these deeper questions, many people will leave the more conventional churches and religions and turn to those practices that are more spiritual. And spiritual practices are designed to take you into the mystery, into the vague realms of your own consciousness, of your own imagination, of any definition, personal definition you may have of spirituality yourself. And in those practices, they're always teaching you how to become very relaxed and focused so that you don't get caught up in the noise that your mind makes. And hopefully, when you organize your brain in that particular way, you end up seeing reality a little more clearly from a calmer place. So these meditation techniques have become so effective that they're now rapidly being integrated into psychotherapy to deal with anxiety and depression. You can teach somebody mindfulness-based meditation in just a few hours, and all you have to do is to practice this 12 minutes a day, and in 8 weeks, you can actually begin to change the structure and function of your brain. That's what our brain scan studies have shown. That's what we've documented in the book that we wrote.
Well, we're about to take a break, but I'm going to, and when we come back, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to talk about gamma waves. I'm going to talk about something else, and I'm not going to warn you about that. And I want to know more about this mindfulness meditation, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online with guest host Ann Strieber.
Hi, Mark. We're back. I want to talk about gamma waves because I have discovered, I hope I'm right, and you can tell me if I am, that gamma waves are the waves in the brain that come up when we are engaged in spiritual practices, and they have been, such as meditation, and they have been produced throughout humankind by shamanistic things like drumming and dancing and chanting and sharp smells, and these are even used in churches, like when the priest, altar boys swing this censer back and forth. But I first want to ask you a put you on the spot type question. Do you believe in God?
Do I believe in God? I can answer that question if you can give me a definition, because I'm sure, depending on how you define God, I'm sure there are some ways in which I would agree with you, and I'm sure there are other ways I would disagree with you. And so it's kind of like saying, if I ask you, do you believe in Oompa? And you say yes or no, you haven't helped the other person even understand what you're talking about. It's a really unfair question. I'd much rather ask a person, not do you believe in God, but how do you believe in God? What is God to you? What does it stir up for you? Where does it take you to?
Now that's a nice answer. I like that. I know we were living in San Antonio, Texas at a time when fundamentalism had kind of swept through. And, you'd be at a cocktail party and somebody would stumble up to you and with, a half-drunk martini with the olive still in it in their hand, and they'd say, when the rapture comes, I'm going up and you're staying here, and I'd say, well, good for you, sweetie. But, it's, I think that's a very nice answer. I like that.
Father Conan, who used to be the head of the Vatican Observatory, and he actually goes around the country lecturing individuals on the Big Bang and evolution and showing where God puts the soul in the human being at the time of birth. It's utterly fascinating. And he was asked that question in terms of, did he believe in God because of his, embracing, even the Pope accepts evolution now.
Oh, thank
goodness. He got mad at the audience, and he said, if you think you know what God is, you don't. And you'll find this true the higher up you go within the hierarchy of Judaism, of Islam, of Buddhism, of Hinduism. The deeper you contemplate God, the more you realize what a mystery is being unfolded in front of you. So some people consider God life.
Yeah.
Yes. For some people, God is life. For some people, God is love. We did research on this. We asked people, adults, to draw pictures of God. We asked people to give their definitions of God. And guess what we found people have in common? Virtually nothing.
Well, I think we have done a lot of research with the UFO question, and we have found that the people who really make progress on this, and these are people with personal experiences with these critters, it's not just people who are going to a conference and hearing somebody else talk about it, but they had very puzzling and troubling experiences. We have found that people who keep the question open are the ones who progress, whose experiences help them to grow.
Well, again.
And I think religion is probably the same way.
Well, again, a UFO experience is a very odd, unusual anomaly.
Yes.
A very interesting experience. And the human brain, as it shifts consciousness, can end up looking at the world in surprisingly different ways that doesn't make sense to everyday consciousness. Whether that be a spiritual experience or a UFO experience or a psychic experience or even an experience of love. I mean, we go through life and we constantly bump into experiences that don't fit everyday reality. And this drives the brain nuts. So we try to find an explanation. In the spiritual practices, in mindfulness, for example, you teach yourself to not have to answer the question. You sit back and you simply observe how your mind makes sense or doesn't make sense out of the experience. You watch your thoughts. You watch your feelings. And when you do that, what happens is that it suppresses the destructive emotional triggering in the center part of your brain, specifically in your amygdala that generates anxiety and fear and anger. So simply by sitting there and breathing deeply and relaxing and just watching your thoughts and experiences and feelings go by makes you physiologically more calm. You have less stress neurochemicals being released in your body and your brain. So you'll actually live a little bit longer. You'll be a little bit more peaceful, and you'll see the world through some amazingly different eyes. That's what our research has documented.
Well, we were members of the Gurdjieff Foundation in New York for many years. And
yes.
I'm sure you've heard of it. And Whitley...
I've practiced the techniques.
Oh, well, yes, and being awake. And Whitley has written a book we sell on our website called The Path about his meditation techniques. that he learned there. And basically he found, and this is something he learned there, that if you sense the body, then you take your conscious mind off what's going on up there in your brain, and you can hear all that clatter going on. And it's an interesting technique. What do you think about that?
Unfortunately, something happened with the phone connection there, and so I've only heard half of what you were saying.
Well, I will repeat it, and our technician will edit it for us. But what I was saying was that in the path, he talks about meditation as he learned it in the Gurdjieff Foundation, and it has to do with sensing your body, kind of step by step, progressively, from the bottom up or the top down, or however you want to do it. And this takes your consciousness away from all the noise that's going on in your brain that you were talking about, kind of a brain tendinitis, and lets you listen to it and therefore understand maybe what's really going on. Does that have anything to do with the type of meditation you talk about?
Yes. Everything that I've experienced and know about Gurdjieff meditation is the same. You get the same type of neurological activity with any form of contemplative practice, anything that involves a slow movement or the repetition of a sound or focusing on a single word or phrase that has
like
deep
Tai Chi,
meaning to you.
Tai Chi movements,
yes.
Yeah.
Tai Chi, Feldenkrais, yoga, Buddhist meditation, Christian centering prayer, all of these have the same neurological imprint. It seems to help to light up our frontal lobes where consciousness resides. I think that it helps to organize the brain so that there's less chaotic chatter and noise going on. We don't really know, but we do know that it suppresses the primitive emotional systems in the brain that generate anxiety, depression, anger, fear, and irritability. So they all work. But shamanic dancing and drumming and more ecstatic music and experiences, that has the opposite effect on the brain. We don't know if it has a neurological benefit or a detriment. But personally speaking, I find that a combination of the two, to go back and forth between very peaceful contemplative meditations and more joyful singing and dancing, is necessary to have a full life. So our current research is looking at ecstatic states as a way to help to hold the community of people together, because meditative and contemplative states take you deep within. It's a very private, personal experience.
Kind of isolate and insulate you.
Yes, and the problem is that when you become isolated and insulated, that doesn't help you get along with each other. So we took all of our meditation research and we created a dialogue meditation. We call it compassionate communication. We describe it in the book or on my website. You can order the CD of it. And we teach a person how to meditate and stay relaxed as they speak to another person. We have them maintain a half smile on their face, a soft eye gaze. We have them stay in a very deeply relaxed state, and we have them speak slowly like I'm talking now. And as you face another individual, what happens is that their brain begins to neurologically mirror and resonate the activity that's going on in your brain. It's called neural resonance.
Really?
And it's a very powerful technique, and this is what's absolutely essential for us to learn how to cooperate with each other.
And it would lead to deep understanding. I mean, you feel like if we could just get, the Palestinians and Israelis to sit down and do that, maybe they'd solve some of their problems.
This exercise we have tested. It only takes, we're training oncologists on how to do it.
These are people who doctors, cancer doctors, folks.
That's right. They tend to be the most disconnected from their patients because they're dealing with life and death issues.
And so many patients die, yeah.
So when we're only allowed 1 hour to train them, and teach them a technique so they stand outside of the door for 30 seconds, quickly relax their body, focus in on their innermost value, breathe deeply, talk slowly when they walk in the room, make soft eye contact, hold a half smile on the face. And each one of these physiological changes has a specific neurological effect to create more compassion, create more cooperation, more empathy with the other individual. So it's very easy to learn. We're even teaching it to executive MBA students and CEOs at Loyola Marymount University. And when you use these meditation techniques, not only does it make you a better communicator and you can connect better with your employers and employees, but it actually, in a Stanford University study, doubles your income.
Well, now this is fascinating. It sounds like that film Up in the Air, which is the George Clooney plays someone who goes around firing people, and actually he seems to do just what you're describing. We're going to take our final break now, and then we'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online with guest host Ann Strieber.
Mark, have you seen the film Up in the Air?
Not yet.
You should see it because it is, I think, I would like to know just if you think the George Clooney character is using your techniques. It's kind of like, well, I just like to know. But first I want to ask you something you mentioned. What is your website address?
It is www.markrobertwaldman.com.
Okay, Mark Robert Waldman. Waldman, I should know who I'm talking to, .com. And so I think that CD sounds wonderful, and I think people ought to definitely check in there and get it. And I also, once we're off the air, I will ask you your snail mail address because I will send you a copy of The Path.
Wonderful, thank you.
So we've talked really about gamma waves because that is what the drumming and chanting is about. And
well, if I may jump
ahead.
in for a moment and explain it.
Please do.
5 years ago, and actually beginning about 30 years ago, the emphasis was put on alpha waves. That there was a lot of research done with EEG machines, which
I used to think it was alpha, but now I learned it was gamma. But go on, yeah.
Well, it turns out that what you're saying about gamma is already old hat and no longer true.
Oh.
So alpha was associated with deep states of relaxation, and alpha basically means you have slow brain waves. They're kind of like the brain tends to there's different ways of measuring different activities in the brain, like brain scan devices might measure cerebral blood flow. Whereas an EEG machine is picking up electrical activity within the first 1 or 2 millimeters of the outermost part of your brain, and you can look at those in terms of different types of wave frequencies. The slower the wave frequency, the more likely you are to fall asleep. The faster the wave frequency, the more likely you are to be awake. So we used to think that if you could generate alpha wave frequencies, you'd be in this meditative, relaxed state. But as new brain scan technology came about, what we've discovered by looking deeper into the brain is that when one part of your brain is generating alpha waves, another part is generating theta, which is like being asleep, another part is generating beta, which is highly focused, and then in the Richie Davidson studies of advanced Buddhist meditators, he found that they were able to generate feelings of compassion when looking at horrendous scenes, people being blown apart, dying, being hit by cars, war-ravaged individuals. Most people react with disgust. These advanced Buddhist meditators were able to suspend the disgust reaction and actually hold a sense of lovingness and kindness inside of them. And he discovered that there were certain parts of the brain that generated very high-frequency gamma waves. So in essence, when we do any form of altered state of consciousness, any type of meditation, different parts of the brain are generating different types of frequencies. And the most recent study will say the following thing. Although we know that these waves are generated, we still don't know what it means.
Interesting. But if we found that out, it sounds like it would be a way to heal people from their traumas, because so many people have memories of child abuse or early childhood trauma. And I know psychologists who say those are, things like child abuse are one of the most common things that they get patients coming to them for.
The three key elements for dealing with any form of physical or emotional trauma have been boiled down to the following statements. One is to stay very relaxed and calm in your body. Two is to be able to simply stay in the present moment, just to be able to observe your thoughts and feelings. That's the mindfulness part.
Yeah.
But the third element is the most important. Without judgment. You have to watch your thoughts and feelings by being neutral. You don't make a big thing out of them one way or the other. Oh, I'm feeling very upset. You don't want to change that. You don't want to try to improve it. You just want to acknowledge and accept that that's how you're thinking or feeling in that moment. This is the most rapid way to heal an emotional wound.
Very interesting. And you've got...
That's what the research has found.
Well, you've got forgiveness in there, and of course that's almost a religious idea. And I know myself that I was not able to come to peace until I was able to forgive my parents for some of the things they did to me. And this was a completely mental thing because they're both dead now, but in other words, it happened completely in my own mind. There was nobody to go to and say, well, I understand, or I'm trying to understand. But yet it helped me, and it's interesting that you say that.
So let me ask you the following question.
Sure.
Before you have
okay, go ahead.
Yes, before you have forgiveness, and everybody in the listening audience can do this too. Think of somebody who you have difficulty forgiving, or you don't want to forgive.
Oh,
you can think of Hitler.
Uh-huh.
What's going on inside of you? What's the opposite of forgiveness? So, if you don't forgive the person, what are you feeling towards that person? What comes to your mind?
I guess resentment, hate, resentment.
Yeah, resentment, hurt, anger, frustration. The problem is that the moment we focus on that hurt, anger, and frustration, we generate that same feeling over and over and over again. Somebody hurts your feelings, and you walk away, and you keep repeating that issue in your mind throughout the rest of the day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Each time you play it over, you're building a stronger memory of that experience. You are injuring yourself the same way that person injured you.
Instead of allowing yourself to forget it or put it in the back of your mind, as you might
Exactly.
say. Mm-hmm.
So forgiveness is a way of simply saying, I'm willing to no longer ruminate on the negative experience that person caused me to have.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't mean you have to love that person or like that person. It mostly means that you accept the situation for how it is. You forgive yourself. So
and
it's more about acceptance.
Yourself. Yeah.
Yes. Because, that person is long gone. They aren't even thinking about you. Why? If you stay angry, it has no effect upon the other person. You're only injuring yourself. So that's why these types of practices are very important. You're caught up in the past when you're not forgiving. Forgiveness simply means you're into the present moment and you're noticing and paying attention to the positive things that are happening in your life right now.
That's a very wise reason to forgive people or to neutralize them. I want to ask you one last question. What do you think of near-death experiences?
I think that, again, it's such a profound, altered state of consciousness. Anytime you come in touch with the fact that you may have almost died, for about 1/3 of the people, this helps the person to reevaluate their lives. And many times a person we found that one of the most important questions in the world is the least asked question. If you go onto Google and you ask almost any question you want, you'll get, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hits. If you ask, what is happiness? What makes me happy? How do I find happiness? You'll get several million Google hits. But if you ask the following question, what is my deepest, innermost value? In any variation of that question, you get less than 50 hits. So what we think happens when you have a near-death experience, or when you engage in a spiritual practice, you are asking yourself without being aware of it, that very important question. What is your deepest, innermost value? And we find that we take a room full of people, and they can be of all nationalities and of all different religious and non-religious persuasions, and we ask them to find a single word that represents their deepest value. And we go around the room, and you'll get words like peace, happiness, compassion, kindness, love, truth, forgiveness, gratitude. And then it's very easy to turn to everybody in that room to say, aren't we all a member of the same church, humanity? And so in this sense, we find that one of the most important meditations is to remind yourself, what is your deepest, innermost value at this moment?
And I guess one would ask oneself that when one was dying.
Yeah, so, death is coming close to death reminds you, have you really been living your life the way you want to? And because you didn't die, you get a second chance. So 1/3 of the people have a transformative experience. 1/3 don't have any experience one way or the other, and 1/3 are actually traumatized by a near-death experience. That's what the research shows.
Oh.
And we talk about that in our book as well.
Yes, it's fascinating, yes. Well, I tell you what, we're about to wrap up, and I'm having a great time talking to you. And as we talked about in an email, we actually live pretty close by, and we're going to meet at a local fish restaurant sometime coming up.
Yes.
But you're going to have a fascinating conversation with subscribers with Peter Levenda, who is not going to be able to meet us at the restaurant, but he is a unique combination of being a incredible conspiracy theorist and a student of religion. And I really, you're going to have a lot of fun talking to him. Thanks for talking to me, Mark.
You are welcome. And if you go to my website, you'll also find out that I'm giving lectures all over the country, and it has a list of the different places that I give lectures and workshops.
Wonderful. And we will definitely put that website on the show.